On a spring afternoon in 1943, at the U-boat command headquarters nestled in Courneval, France, Capitaine Sauce Eberhard Gott examined a set of intelligence photographs with an expression that bordered on amusement. His monocle reflected the pale sunlight streaming through the windows as he studied what American naval planners were calling an aircraft carrier. The vessel in question was USS Bogue, which had actually been operational for 8 months already, though German intelligence was only now catching up to its existence. What Gott saw made him laugh out loud, a genuine bark of derision that caused several staff officers to glance up from their work. The ship was so obviously improvised, so clearly cobbled together from merchant vessel components, that it seemed almost insulting to German naval tradition. He handed the photograph across his desk to Contra-Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeberg, who examined it with similar dismissiveness. That evening, Gott made an entry in the war diary that would prove painfully ironic in retrospect. He wrote that the Americans were constructing carriers from merchant ships, floating crates with a handful of aircraft that posed no serious threat to the wolf packs. These vessels lacked everything a proper warship required: the velocity of fleet carriers, the protective armour of combat vessels, the refined lines of authentic naval architecture. They represented desperation given physical form in steel and rivets. Neither man understood they were examining the weapon that would obliterate their submarine force. In 18 months, these small escort carriers would completely reverse the Battle of the Atlantic, transforming it from a German advantage into an Allied triumph so absolute that U-boat crews would speak of their missions as nothing short of suicide runs. The transformation was already being written in American shipyards, where Henry Kaiser was churning out escort carriers at a pace that exceeded Germany's entire submarine construction capacity. The psychological journey these German officers would undertake, from scorn to absolute terror, would unfold not across years, but across mere months, as they discovered that American industrial logic had once again surpassed anything their imaginations had prepared them for. The real beginning of this story stretched back to June 8, 1941, a full 18 months before Pearl Harbor, when President Roosevelt recognized something his own admirals initially considered impossible. The nation needed aircraft carriers, not dozens but hundreds of them, yet fleet carriers demanded 3 years of construction and cost the equivalent of 10 destroyers each. Roosevelt's answer seemed ridiculous to traditional naval thinkers on both sides of the Atlantic. Take merchant ships and convert them into carriers, construct them on commercial production lines, accept that they would be slow and vulnerable and limited, but produce them in such overwhelming quantities that their individual weaknesses became strategically meaningless. Captain Friedrich Rouge, serving as naval liaison to the German High Command, reviewed the initial American escort carrier specifications in early 1942 with professional disbelief. Maximum speed of 18 knots, barely faster than a submarine running on the surface. Wooden flight decks on certain models. Commercial-grade steel instead of armour plating. Single screws that would be catastrophically vulnerable to torpedo damage. Rouge composed an analysis for Admiral Raeder in which he observed that the Americans appeared to be confusing sheer quantity with actual quality. These vessels were maritime catastrophes waiting to happen. Any properly trained U-boat commander would find them easy prey. The confidence of the German naval establishment rested on substantial foundations. Their U-boat force had sent 1,299 Allied ships to the bottom between September 1939 and December 1942, representing 6,266,000 tons of shipping. The Wolfpack tactics that Admiral Karl Donitz had developed had transformed the North Atlantic into what Churchill privately admitted was the only thing that genuinely frightened him throughout the entire war. U-boats operated with near-complete impunity, surfacing during nighttime hours to pursue convoys with diesel engines that gave them 17 knots of surface speed. Aircraft represented the greatest danger to submarines, but land-based planes couldn't reach the mid-Atlantic Gap, that lethal expanse beyond aircraft range where U-boats gathered to massacre merchant ships. Oberleutnant Searcy, Herbert Werner, commanding U-230, made an entry in his war diary on March 3, 1943, recording his evaluation of American escort carriers after encountering one near convoy SC-121. He cited observing what appeared to be a merchant vessel with aircraft positioned on its deck, too slow to constitute a genuine threat, too small to carry a meaningful air group. He maintained surveillance for 2 hours. Aircraft operations appeared amateurish, with visible difficulties managing wind conditions. He reported to BDU that American desperation had apparently reached the point of sending merchant ships equipped with planes into combat zones. Werner's contempt reflected standard German naval doctrine, which failed to comprehend 3 critical elements. First, the escort carriers didn't require high speed because they travelled with convoys that moved at 8 to 10 knots. Second, they didn't need large air groups because their aircraft only needed to force U-boats underwater, reducing their speed from 17 knots to 7 knots submerged, rendering them unable to reach attack positions. Third, and most devastatingly, the Americans would construct so many of these carriers that the entire Atlantic would fall within aircraft coverage. The production statistics that would doom the U-boat force were already accumulating by spring 1943, though German intelligence grossly miscalculated them. Henry Kaiser's Vancouver-Washington shipyard had compressed construction time for a Casablanca-class escort carrier from 6 months down to 10 weeks. By standardizing components and applying assembly line techniques borrowed from automobile manufacturers, Kaiser's workers could launch a fresh escort carrier every week by summer 1943. The Germans estimated American escort carrier production at perhaps 1 per month. The actual rate approached 1 every 5 days at peak production. Kapitän-Leutnant Peter Kremer, commanding U-333, experienced his first glimpse of what mass-produced naval aviation meant on April 23, 1943. His boat was running on the surface 650 miles southwest of Ireland, well within the mid-Atlantic gap that had been safe submarine territory. The lookout's cry sent the crew scrambling for the hatches. No land-based aircraft could possibly reach this position. Then he spotted them, 2 Avenger torpedo bombers approaching from the northeast. His war diary captured the confusion perfectly. Aircraft at an impossible range from land. Must be from a fleet carrier, but intelligence had reported no fleet carriers in the area. He initiated a crash dive. Depth charges detonated uncomfortably close. His boat sustained minor damage. He surfaced after 2 hours to discover a convoy with a converted merchant vessel launching aircraft. How many of these ships did they possess? The answer to Kremer's question would have destroyed German morale completely. By May 1943, the United States Navy had commissioned 11 escort carriers with 40 more under construction. Each carrier operated between 24 and 30 aircraft. The pilots were mostly reservists, men who had been civilians just 2 years earlier, trained in abbreviated programs that horrified traditional naval aviators. Yet these amateur pilots flying from merchant ship carriers were about to accomplish what the Kriegsmarine had declared impossible: the complete neutralization of the U-boat threat. Rear Admiral Julius Führer, reviewing German naval intelligence reports in June 1943, noted the increasing frequency of U-boat encounters with carrier aircraft in previously secure areas. His analysis, discovered in captured documents after the war, revealed mounting concern. American escort carriers were now being reported in the North Atlantic, South Atlantic, and Mediterranean approaches. Intelligence suggested at least 20 operational vessels. If this figure was accurate, it represented a fundamental transformation in convoy protection capability. He recommended an immediate reassessment of Wolfpack tactics. The reassessment arrived too late. USS Bogue and her escorts had already begun what U-boat crews would later call the extended Black May period. On May 22, 1943, Bogue's aircraft spotted U-569 running on the surface. The submarine executed a crash dive, but the Avenger marked its position with a smoke float. 4 hours of coordinated attacks followed. U-569's commander, Captain Lieutenant Hans-Peter Hinch, surfaced his dying boat long enough to transmit a final message. Under continuous air attack, carrier aircraft maintaining contact despite evasion attempts, no escape possible, scuttling vessel. Admiral Donitz himself reviewed the message, initially suspecting British deception. Only when two more boats reported similar experiences did reality begin penetrating German naval consciousness. Continuous air attack had been impossible in the mid-Atlantic, yet experienced commanders were reporting precisely that phenomenon. Kapitän Lieutenant Klaus Rudloff, commanding U-709, encountered USS Kors aircraft on June 24, 1943. His subsequent report revealed the tactical revolution underway. Attacked by carrier aircraft 700 miles from the nearest land, forced to remain submerged for 14 hours, battery exhausted. He surfaced at night to recharge and was immediately detected by aircraft with apparent detection equipment. The aircraft appeared to have unlimited persistence. He requested instructions for dealing with continuous air coverage. There were no instructions because German naval doctrine had never contemplated continuous air coverage in mid-ocean. The escort carriers operated in hunter-killer groups with 3 to 4 destroyers. Each carrier could maintain dawn-to-dusk surveillance over a 100-mile radius. When multiple escort carriers operated together, they created overlapping zones that made surface operations suicidal for U-boats. The technical capabilities of American escort carriers exceeded German estimates significantly. Each Casablanca-class carrier displaced 7,800 tons and measured 512 feet in length. The flight deck could handle 20,000-pound aircraft landing at 80 miles per hour. The hangar deck accommodated 28 aircraft with complete maintenance facilities. Ammunition magazines held depth charges, bombs and torpedoes sufficient for 2 weeks of continuous operations. Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, one of Germany's most decorated U-boat commanders, encountered this reality on July 13, 1943, when U-201 was caught on the surface by aircraft from USS Kors. His post-action report revealed the shock. Aircraft appeared without warning. No time for a proper crash dive. Went deep immediately. Heard multiple depth charges. Remained at maximum depth for 6 hours. Surfaced after dark and was immediately illuminated by aircraft with powerful lights. This pattern repeated 3 times. The aircraft seemed to know exactly where they would surface. What Schnee didn't know was that Kors aircraft carried ASV Mark III radar, capable of detecting a surfaced submarine at 15 miles, even in complete darkness. The equipment, combined with Lee lights for illumination and acoustic homing torpedoes, meant that darkness no longer protected U-boats. U-boat crews had always counted on night surface operations to recharge batteries and make speed to attack positions. Now every surface moment invited death from above. The production miracle enabling this transformation defied German comprehension. Kaiser Shipbuilding produced the 50th escort carrier, USS Casablanca, in November 1943, just 18 months after laying the first keel. The ship was built in 101 days from keel laying to commissioning. Every component was standardized. Parts manufactured in 267 factories across 32 states arrived at the shipyard on precise schedules. Assembly proceeded 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. German intelligence officer Fregattenkapitän Hans Mechel, analyzing American shipbuilding capacity in December 1943, wrote a report that Admiral Donitz initially rejected as defeatist. American escort carrier production appeared to exceed 1 unit weekly. At this rate, by mid-1944, they would possess over 100 such vessels. Each carrier negated the effectiveness of 3 to 5 U-boats. His projection indicated the U-boat force would be neutralized within 12 months. By January 1944, American escort carriers were not just defending convoys, but actively hunting U-boats. Hunter-killer groups centered on escort carriers prowled the Atlantic, using intelligence from ultra-intercepts to locate U-boat patrol lines. The hunted had become hunters, and German submarines found themselves trapped in an increasingly deadly environment. U-boat ace Kapitän Leutnant Werner Henke, commanding U-515, experienced this reversal on April 9, 1944. Operating north of the Azores, U-515 was located by aircraft from USS Guadalcanal. Henke, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves with 26 ships sunk, found himself helpless against coordinated air and surface attack. His final radio message conveyed unprecedented desperation. Under attack by multiple aircraft, cannot remain surfaced, cannot escape submerged, batteries failing, chlorine gas in boat, destroyer bearing down, time is up. The escort carrier Guadalcanal and her hunter-killer group had revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Operating independently of convoys, they could pursue U-boat contacts for days. On this patrol alone, Guadalcanal's group would sink 3 U-boats and damage 2 others. The carrier's aircraft flew 2,484 hours in 30 days. German submarines that had once stalked the Atlantic now cowered beneath the waves, praying to avoid detection. The technical superiority of American production extended beyond mere numbers. Each escort carrier incorporated lessons learned from previous operations. The Casablanca-class ships built in late 1943 featured improved radar, better communication systems, stronger flight decks, and enhanced crew habitability. German observers who examined captured American escort carriers in late 1944 expected American mass production to mean inferior quality, but discovered the opposite. Kapitän Soze Klaus Schultz, analyzing captured American technical documents in February 1944, reported to U-Boat Command that American escort carriers employed assembly techniques that should be impossible. Entire sections were prefabricated, down to installed equipment and wiring. These sections, weighing up to 200 tons, were lifted by cranes and welded together. A ship took shape in weeks rather than months. Each vessel benefited from lessons learned on previous hulls. By March 1944, the psychological transformation of the U-boat force was complete. Crews that had once competed for tonnage sunk, now celebrated mere survival. Morale collapsed as experienced crews recognized their situation. With over 50 escort carriers operational and more launching monthly, there was nowhere in the Atlantic beyond aircraft reach. The numbers confirmed the transformation. In May 1943, before escort carriers became fully operational, U-boats sank 50 Allied ships. By May 1944, with over 60 escort carriers active, U-boats sank only 5 ships while losing 25 submarines. The exchange ratio had reversed so completely that Dönitz considered suspending operations entirely. USS Block Island exemplified the evolution of escort carrier tactics. Operating with 4 destroyer escorts, Block Island pioneered night operations using radar-equipped Avengers. On May 29, 1944, Block Island's aircraft located U-549 on the surface at night. The subsequent coordinated attack demonstrated American precision. Aircraft maintained contact while vectoring destroyers to the submarine's position. When U-549 dived, sonobuoys tracked its underwater movement. The submarine fought desperately, managing to torpedo Block Island before being destroyed. This loss of Block Island, one of only 6 escort carriers lost during the war, illustrated American industrial supremacy rather than German success. Block Island was replaced by 2 escort carriers within weeks. Her aircraft and crew transferred to other carriers with barely a pause in operations. Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz confronted this reality in a staff conference on June 2, 1944. The transcript reveals complete understanding. The enemy's small carriers have eliminated our tactical advantages. We cannot operate on the surface by day due to aircraft. We cannot operate on the surface by night due to radar. The Americans have not defeated our submarines. They have made submarines obsolete. By August 1944, the United States Navy operated 77 escort carriers with 35 more under construction. These ships had moved beyond convoy protection to become offensive weapons. Operating off the European coast, escort carriers supported the Normandy invasion and hunted U-boats in the Bay of Biscay. German coastal U-boat bases previously immune to naval attack now faced carrier aircraft striking from beyond the range of land-based fighters. The technical evolution continued throughout 1944. The Commencement Bay class, larger and faster than the Casablancas, began entering service. These ships displaced 11,373 tons and could make 19 knots. Their flight decks stretched 557 feet. Each ship cost $11 million and required 8 months to build, still a fraction of fleet carrier cost and time. German naval intelligence struggled to comprehend the industrial capacity these ships represented. Corvette and Kapitän Ernst Herrschagen, analyzing American production in September 1944, wrote that each escort carrier required 30,000 tons of steel, 2,000 miles of electrical cable, 50 miles of piping, 80,000 blueprints, and 35,000 different components. Yet they produced them like automobiles. Seattle-Tacoma shipbuilding alone had delivered 16 carriers in 18 months. Captain Daniel Gallery, commanding USS Guadalcanal, achieved the ultimate demonstration of escort carrier dominance on June 4, 1944. His hunter-killer group forced U-505 to the surface and captured it intact, the first enemy warship captured at sea by the United States Navy since 1815. The submarine's seizure demonstrated that U-boats were now prey rather than predators. The statistics of transformation were overwhelming. In 1942, before escort carriers became operational, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships, totaling 6,266,000 tons. In 1944, with escort carriers dominating the Atlantic, U-boats sank 132 ships, totaling 773,000 tons, while losing 249 submarines. German recognition of this transformation appeared in unexpected places. Lieutenant Sir C. Hans Rudolf Rosing, captured from U-846 in May 1944, told interrogators that they knew the war was lost when they counted American escort carriers. In 1943, they laughed at them. By 1944, they feared them more than battleships. An escort carrier could clear the entire ocean. Total escort carrier production reached 151 ships by war's end, with 122 built in the United States and 29 in Britain using American designs. These ships operated approximately 4,000 aircraft, more than the entire German Luftwaffe possessed in 1944. The pilots, trained in programs that produced 35,000 naval aviators annually, outnumbered total German U-boat crews by a factor of 3. Vice Admiral Lionel Wells, analyzing escort carrier effectiveness after the war, concluded that the escort carrier program represented the perfect convergence of industrial capacity, tactical innovation, and strategic necessity. They built merchant ships that could launch aircraft, trained civilians to fly them, and changed the fundamental nature of naval warfare. The human dimension was captured in the interrogation of Kapitän Lieutenant Wolfgang Harder, captured from U-575 in March 1944. He told his interrogators that American escort carriers killed the U-boat force through presence. They were everywhere, always. Entire patrols were spent submerged, seeing nothing. Men went mad from the stress. Those little carriers built in weeks destroyed the elite of German naval power. Admiral Royal Ingersoll, Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, testified to Congress in March 1945 that the escort carrier program succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. They anticipated the carriers would help protect convoys. Instead, they eliminated the submarine threat entirely. The Battle of the Atlantic was won not by destroyers or patrol aircraft, but by these converted merchant ships. The German Navy's final assessment came from Gross Admiral Donitz in his farewell address to the U-boat force on May 4, 1945. He told them they fought gallantly against overwhelming odds. The enemy's production of aircraft carriers made their struggle hopeless. They built carriers faster than Germany could build submarines, trained pilots faster than Germany could train crews, and covered the ocean with aircraft. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope. These ships flew over 460,000 combat sorties during the war. Their aircraft sank or participated in sinking 53 U-boats and 17 Japanese submarines. They provided air cover for every major amphibious operation after 1943. Only 6 American escort carriers were lost to enemy action. The Kaiser shipyards that produced most escort carriers became symbols of American manufacturing power. Workers who had never built ships before the war were launching carriers at rates that peacetime professionals considered impossible. Women comprised 27% of the workforce. African Americans, another 15%. This diverse workforce produced carriers that swept German submarines from the seas. Captain Eric Brown, British test pilot who flew from numerous American escort carriers, provided perspective. The Germans mocked these ships because they didn't understand the revolution they represented. One escort carrier was vulnerable. 50 escort carriers were invincible. The Americans understood this. The Germans never did until too late. Vergatenkapitän Otto Kretschmer, Germany's most successful U-boat ace before his capture in 1941, watched the transformation from prisoner camps. Released after the war, he wrote that they failed to understand that Americans approached war as an industrial problem. While Germany focused on tactics and crew quality, America focused on production and coverage. The escort carriers were not better ships. They were the right ships in the right numbers. Germans thought war was about warrior skill and superior tactics. They were wrong. Rear Admiral Calvin Durgin, who commanded escort carrier task groups, summarized the achievement succinctly. They took merchant hulls, added flight decks, and changed naval history. The Germans laughed because they saw converted merchantmen. Americans saw mobile airfields that could be anywhere, anytime. Germans counted ships. Americans counted coverage area. The final irony came from the top leadership, who in April 1945 reportedly asked Dönitz why the U-boats were failing. Dönitz explained about the escort carriers. The response was allegedly to ask why Germany had not built such vessels. Dönitz replied simply that they could not build one per week. There was no response to that. By May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered, the United States Navy operated 105 escort carriers with more under construction. These ships had made the Atlantic an Allied lake. The U-boat force that had nearly starved Britain was itself starved of operational space. Many late-war U-boats never fired a torpedo in anger, spending their entire careers hiding from carrier aircraft. Statistical analysis confirmed the transformation. In 1942, a U-boat had a 75% chance of returning from patrol. By early 1945, the survival rate dropped to 25%. The primary cause was aircraft, predominantly from escort carriers. Of 40,000 German U-boat sailors, 30,000 died, a 75% casualty rate. Most died after escort carriers made submarine operations essentially suicidal. These men were sacrificed to a strategic misconception that American industrial capacity couldn't overcome German tactical expertise. Commander George Chamberlain, who served aboard USS Guadalcanal, offered perspective. They weren't better sailors than the Germans. German U-boat crews were incredibly brave and skilled. But Americans had endless carriers with endless aircraft. Every submarine Germany built, America countered with a carrier that could hunt it. It wasn't fair. It wasn't supposed to be. The escort carrier program cost approximately $1.5 billion in 1940s dollars. This investment destroyed U-boat forces while saving countless Allied merchant ships. Each escort carrier cost about $7 million and could protect convoys worth hundreds of millions while destroying submarines worth millions more. Workers at Kaiser shipyards expressed pride in their achievement. Rosie Devlin, a welder who worked on 12 escort carriers, said they knew those ships weren't pretty. They were basic and simple. But they also knew they worked. Every carrier they launched meant convoys would arrive safely. They were fighting the war with rivet guns and welding torches. The final accounting was stark. Germany began the war with 57 operational U-boats and built 1,162 more. They lost 785 U-boats, with 632 lost to Allied action. Approximately 175 were destroyed by escort carrier aircraft or hunter-killer groups. Considering escort carriers only became fully operational in mid-1943, this represented extraordinary effectiveness. Starting with 0 escort carriers in 1941, the United States built 151 by 1945. These ships operated approximately 4,500 aircraft at peak strength. They flew over 460,000 sorties and fundamentally changed naval warfare while maintaining an operational rate exceeding 80%. German U-boat commander Herbert Werner, one of few to survive the entire war, provided the summary. The escort carriers killed us through superior presence. We could avoid individual ships, but not systematic coverage. Every carrier they launched shrunk our operational area until finally we had nowhere to go but down. The transformation from German contempt to despair occurred in less than 18 months. This rapid reversal demonstrated that industrial warfare operated on different timescales than traditional military planning. While Germany slowly improved submarine technology, America rapidly multiplied carrier production. The German response, found in captured Kriegsmarine documents, was resignation. The American escort carrier program succeeded through brute industrial force. They built carriers faster than we could sink them, trained pilots faster than we could shoot them down. We were defeated not by better warriors, but by better factories. The escort carriers that German admirals laughed at in 1943 had by 1945 transformed the Atlantic from a U-boat hunting ground into an Allied lake. These converted merchant ships accomplished what the Royal Navy's destroyers could not: the complete suppression of the submarine threat through overwhelming presence. The German admirals who laughed at escort carriers in 1943 lived, if they survived, to see these same vessels accepting U-boat surrenders in 1945. The transformation took less than 2 years. In that brief period, American industrial capacity rewrote naval warfare rules that had existed for centuries. The story ends where it began, with German naval officers examining American escort carriers. But instead of laughing at their crude construction, they stood silent, understanding finally that these simple ships had destroyed the U-boat force more completely than any enemy in history. American industrial might had transformed maritime warfare forever. The final testimony came from Gross Admiral Dönitz himself, speaking to his staff as Germany surrendered. They lost the Battle of the Atlantic not to superior seamanship, but to superior arithmetic. The Americans built escort carriers faster than Germany could comprehend. Germans thought war was about warriors. Americans knew it was about production. Germans were wrong. Americans were right. That is why we lost.